and all. I mean, our phone, our microphone, so we don't distract or that.
Okay.
And then introduce yourself too, I guess. So.
Okay. My name is Melissa Lawton. My favorite recess activity as a young girl was the seesaw. The simplicity of a game that propelled me up and down, balanced on a pole, laughing with a friend was the highlight of my day. As a child, I knew the best way to have fun on the seesaw was to find someone who could balance the other side, someone similar in size. I didn't fully understand gravity and force, but I did understand balance. Although this is a law of nature, I was too young to see that. All I knew was life was best when it was balanced. Balance is a theme you will find throughout nature and science. It seems to be everywhere. Too much of anything can be harmful. Too much sun without water causes a harsh environment for plants. Ecosystems and chemical reactions also rely on balance between complementary forces or elements, for elements to thrive and be at harmony. Balance is needed for natural harmony. It is needed for human relations as well, particularly in the family. A husband and a wife raising their biological children is a balance for their family. This balance creates stability for the children and for the society in which they live. Men and women are different but complementary in physical, mental, hormonal, and emotional ways. Years of biology have shown these facts. In a family, children need both a father and a mother to thrive. Let me share some of Oscar Lopez's story to illustrate. He says, quite simply, growing up with gay parents was very difficult, and not because of prejudice from neighbors. People in our community didn't really know what was going on in the house. To most outside observers, I was a well-raised, high-achieving child, finishing high school with straight A's. Inside, however, I was confused. When your home life is so drastically different from everyone around you, in a fundamental way striking at basic physical relations, you grow up weird. I had no mental health disorders or biological conditions. I just grew up in a house so unusual that I was destined to exist as a social outcast. My peers learned all the unwritten rules of decorum and body language in their homes. They understood what was appropriate to say in certain settings and what wasn't. They learned both traditionally masculine and traditionally feminism social mechanisms. Even if my peers' parents were divorced, and many of them were, they still grew up seeing male and female social models. They learned typically how to be bold and unflinching from male figures and how to write thank you cards and be sensitive from female figures. These are stereotypes, of course, but stereotypes come in handy when you inevitably leave the safety of your lesbian mother's trailer and have to work and survive in a world where everyone thinks in stereotypical terms, even gays. Later, he goes on to say, gay people who grew up in straight parents' households may have struggled with their sexual orientation, but when it came to the vast social universe of adaptations not dealing with sexuality, how to act, how to speak, how to behave, they had the advantage of learning at home. Many gays don't realize what a blessing it was to be reared in a traditional home. My home life was not traditional nor conventional. I suffered because of it, in ways that are difficult for sociologists to index, both nervous and yet blunt. I would later seem strange, even in the eyes of gays and bisexual adults who had little patience for someone like me. I was just as odd to them as I was to straight people. According to Ryan Anderson's book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom, marriage is about what is in the best interest of society's future. When societies deviate from intact biological family as the ideal, people suffer. In a study by Mark Regnerus, which took a very large random sample, the most comprehensive of this type ever conducted, we find many alarming facts. To name a few, adults from this study raised by lesbian mothers had a 28% unemployment rate, by gay fathers a 20%, and by intact biological families 8% unemployment. Even more alarming are statistics that show children raised in homes by gay fathers are 3 times, and children from lesbian mothers are 4 times more likely to have experienced forced sex than those raised by biological families. Suicide rates were 5 times more likely in adults raised in gay homes and more than 2 times as likely as adults in lesbian homes than in families that are intact. For intact biological families, safety and education were dramatically higher, and arrests and public assistance were dramatically lower for the adults after they were grown. Financially, emotionally, physically, it is unwise for public policies to allow and encourage homosexual couples to rear children. The children and society suffer because of this great imbalance. Intact biological families are the ideal and will help our society to thrive as we move into the future. Okay.
Good job.
Oh.
Yeah. You set the bar high.
Yeah. So I stumbled over. I got out of breath just because I was so nervous and I'm not even pregnant.
Okay.
Okay.
So we
Okay.
All right.
So questions that you guys have.
Are we supposed to be challenging your argument with the questions?
Not necessarily, just
I wasn't
questions
sure.
really. That doesn't have to become like that like a challenge. Just like questions that like that we have in her topic.
Well, I have
Right.
one.
Okay.
With the statistics you listed, do you think there's any reason why children who are raised by two fathers seem to do a little bit better than children raised by two mothers? Because it seemed all the statistics showed that two fathers did a little bit better.
You're right. And in all my reading, I didn't really find an analysis for that of why they would be a little bit better from gay fathers than lesbian mothers. My personal opinion would be that from a religious standpoint, that is, mothers are responsible for raising their children, and when they deviate from that role of being in a gay or a lesbian relationship and their focus isn't their children, I think children suffer worse because there's that not only expectation, but in my opinion, eternal role that mothers have. That's personal because I don't have science for that one.
Yeah, that's a good point, though.
Go ahead. I was just gonna ask, since this topic is like a really sensitive topic, do you think there's any way you can like advocate for it and not offend anyone? Like, this is more of a personal question, I guess, but
I don't think
I don't know. Yeah.
Like, even reading a lot of the stuff that I did, like kids who grew up in these homes, like they were saying even for them, like as they dealt with bisexuality or they dealt with different things, they felt like they didn't even have a place in the LGBT community because they didn't fit whatever norm is supposed to be in the LGBT community. So I don't think so. I mean, I don't think we should try and offend people, but we also shouldn't. We just have to realize that that's probably going to happen.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you, like, what you suggest for us to specifically, how we would specifically advocate for this cause, or I guess against this cause.
No, you're good. I didn't have time in my thing, so I didn't know if I should put that in or not. I think just as it comes up for legislation, I think we need to speak out. I mean, people are going to live their life, and I don't want to get involved in people's personal lives. That's their life. But I can speak out for laws. So when the things come up for legislation, when people try and be elected for positions, we need to be aware of where their stance are on these things. We need to challenge them. And in those open forums, we need to communicate that why family is so important.
Good.
So my question that I wrote is, what do you think about, like, how do you approach this topic for people that truly seem happy, and you can see that they are good people, they're like same-sex marriages or families. You see them, they are good people, they contribute to the society, they try to put like values, except for the same-sex marriage, values like being a responsible person, doing good to the world, all that. Like, how do you advocate for that, saying like, oh no, you're not, should not have this same-sex marriage as allowed or protected by the government, or that like looking that they're good people and they're really like probably better than others, like heterosexual couples or marriages.
Sure. And honestly, that's where I struggle is there are examples of people that I know that they are good homosexual couples, then they look like they have a good family. And as far as personal, like individual one-on-one, I don't know, like, how do I put this? Just like you're going to have intact biological families that break the break the rules, like they aren't a good family, or there's abuse, or there's stuff going on. There's exceptions. For the most part, right, we have science that shows us intact biological families are really good. There's always a few outliers. The same with homosexual families. Most of them, unfortunately, don't, statistics, like real science shows that most of them don't have positive outcomes. And I'm sure there are a few that are good. There are some social outliers, but overall, as a public policy, it's not okay. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. All right, that's 5 minutes. So I put on the list who's next. So Rochelle is next.
Okay. Oh gosh, I don't know why I'm so nervous because you guys are all so nice, but I feel like all like sweaty palms and dry mouth. Okay, let me pull this up. Oops, sorry. Let's start my time. All right, so I was out to dinner with my husband the other night and couldn't help looking at the people around us as we talked and ate. It was both fascinating and sad to see how many people were glued to their screens. The young couple to the side of us were focused on their phones through most of the evening, barely saying a word to each other. The family on the other side of us had given their kids a tablet to play on, and the parents kept scrolling on their phones, barely speaking to each other, quite unaware of what was going on around them. All around us was a similar picture. Even those who were talking to each other still kept checking their phones when there was a lull in conversation or the meal. We see it every day, this obsession with technology. We see people texting while driving, kids being babysat and entertained 24/7 by electronics, and those with the need to constantly post updates on social media, checking the time, weather, sports updates every few minutes. How many of us feel anxiety at not being able to immediately respond to an email or text? We indulge in the need to always have something electronic in our hand, as it connects us to our music, games, social networks, and the internet. Yet studies are proving that it is disconnecting us to many important things in life. For instance, International Online Journal of Educational Sciences reports internet addiction is associated with declines in the size of social circle, depression, loneliness, lower self-esteem and life satisfaction, poor mental health, low family function, financial problems, and may contribute to anxiety and stress. And clearly this problem doesn't just affect adults. Another study on the predictive values of psychiatric symptoms for internet addiction in adolescents found that depression, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, social phobia, and hostility were found with excessive use. Youth who are addicted to technology develop emotional problems that lead to social and family problems. And youth who don't have the skills or tools to combat this problem become adults who continue with these problems, often passing them on to their children and creating unnecessary tensions and problems in their personal and professional lives. These results suggest that these symptoms should be detected early on and intervention carried out to prevent internet addiction in adolescents and youth. We need legislation that will provide schools the necessary funding needed to educate parents, teachers, and youth about the dangers of technology addiction and the means to intervene and provide resources for those in need. Along with the personal and social implications of these findings, this behavior has important implications for the workplace and is resulting in substantial loss of productivity in companies who are not implementing internet governance policies. In fact, according to a recent study by Vault.com, internet surfing costs $54 billion annually in lost productivity. This affects the economy, which in turn hurts families and children. Many other countries, including Australia, China, Japan, India, Italy, Korea, and Taiwan, already officially recognize tech addiction as a disorder. Some even going so far as to declare the issue a public health crisis, leading governments and healthcare providers to develop a series of major initiatives to curb the problem. The South Korean government sponsors about 200 counseling centers and hospitals with programs on internet addiction and has trained more than 1,000 counselors. In 2013, the Ministry of Education in Japan introduced internet fasting camps for young addicts to receive counseling in a tech-free environment. China has more than 300 treatment centers, as they estimate they have over 10 million teenagers who are addicted. Yet in the United States, Almost all clients have to pay out of pocket, as the centers can't bill health insurance companies for internet addiction treatment, since it hasn't been recognized in the DSM as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. Yet research has shown that it can be as addicting as drugs, and the changes it creates in the brain are similar to those of a drug addict. The cost of these programs are anywhere from $3,000 to $45,000 out of pocket. As we can clearly see, technology addiction affects us all, and the distinct lack of legislation that promotes awareness and solutions to this problem in America is upsetting. Therefore, I implore you to petition the APA to give more consideration to recognizing technology addiction as the mental disorder. We have an urgent need to develop standard criteria for diagnosis, reliable instruments for screening employees and students, programs to promote healthy technology use, and policies and intervention plans that are affordable to all. Thank you for your time.
Good
Yeah, good
job.
job.
4 minutes, 30 seconds. Good job.
Oh, I know, watching the clock.
Okay,
Right.
I'll ask you a question. Okay.
Okay.
So, do you think technology addiction would be reduced if more parents made rules regarding it to their kids, or do you think their kids would still find a way around it?
No, absolutely. I think that is one of the big problems, is that there are not limits given to kids, and because of that, they don't learn to self-regulate. They don't learn when enough is enough, and so definitely that is one of. If you go on the websites for all of these private companies, they have like different steps that you can use to treat it or recognize it, and that's one of the first steps, is parents setting limits and rules and helping them have periods where they're unplugged. It really does change the chemicals in a person's brain.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. So you talked about other countries that recognize internet addiction and then offer treatments. How effective are those treatments?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I don't know. I would assume that they're effective because they are continuing with the programs, and they're continuing to open more centers and to do different types of therapy, wilderness therapy, and setting up camps where you can go for a week and with no cost. In one of the places, I think it's Japan, they have a mandatory time that you have to go through the school, that they have to unplug and just kind of, I don't know, reboot their brains. I guess in Japan, the gaming industry is like huge, and that's a big part of their tech addiction. But I don't have numbers.
That's okay. Thank you.
I have a question. Do you think that when it comes to technology addiction, I want to say every generation is about like every 10 years or so. Do you think looking at like every 10-year segments, kind of going back, do you think like how old you were when technology was introduced kind of plays a factor in the addiction? Like, I remember being about 12 or so when it started picking up, whereas my son is going to grow up with it all around him, and then my parents didn't even really have it. So do you think that kind of plays a factor?
Absolutely. I do. And some of the studies I read said that children under 3 should not even have screen time. They should not be using this. And you see this all the time. Like, it is such a babysitter, and it's so tempting because it keeps these kids quiet. But on your phone, you can get little games for children. And I see them, even under a year, handing their phone and hitting the buttons. And so, yeah, I do. I think it starts training the brain at a very early age. The more you're exposed to it, the higher risk you have of becoming addicted to it. Thank you, Sydney.
I don't know. We still have time. I can ask question. What it seems to be, like the one of the technological like addiction to like social media. Like, do you find like like Facebook, Twitter, that people get like becoming more addicted to?
Sadly, from what I saw on the research, the bigger addictions was gaming addiction, gambling addiction, and sex addiction that came a lot with these. And so I think that's one of the problems of diagnosing this, is they're having a hard time saying, is this a technology addiction, or is this a gaming addiction? Is this a pornography addiction? Because it's all lumped into kind of the same thing. So sadly, those were some of the biggest addiction regarding technology addiction. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Good job. Okay, Shay.
Thank you, guys.
I think you're up. Good job, Michelle.
All right. Holy cow, I'm nervous too. Okay. All right. I'm Shay.
Before you start, I don't know if you can because I didn't time myself before, so I don't know if you can help us. If you see a form, maybe you can give us a timeout. So at least for me to let me know that I reached my 4 minutes.
Okay, F4. I'll go like this.
Can help to other kids.
Oh, okay. I was like, what?
You guys want that? Before I forget, if that can help you, it's gonna help me. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I can,
Right. Okay, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Okay, we're good? All right. I'm Shay Peck. Did you know there are 4 million reports of abuse against women each year, and 37% of those reports are verbal abuse? Of all the cases of relationship abuse, 40% of men are the ones being abused. Kara Curtin Silver stated that emotional verbal abuse is the most common form of abuse in marriage, but only 7.4% of women and 8.3% of men that are abused in a relationship actually report the abuse. According to Lancer, emotional abuse is speech and/or behavior that is derogatory, controlling, or manipulative. It is withholding love, communication, support, or even money. Verbal abuse is a type of emotional abuse. It is using threats, judging, criticizing, lying, blaming, name-calling, and raging. It is easy to define emotional verbal abuse, but when it happens, it is hard to detect for emotional abuse because they may not even know it is happening. That is exactly what happened to Ruth. Ruth was an overweight girl who thought she would never get married, but then she met Doug. She loved Doug and would do anything for him, but didn't realize that she was creating the perfect opportunity for emotional abuse to come into their marriage. They got married, and immediately after they got married, she noticed how controlling Doug was. He didn't care what Ruth's thoughts and feelings were. Instead, it was his way. In fact, Ruth said, Doug seemed to take pleasure in upsetting me. This didn't stop Ruth from loving him. She didn't think that she was getting verbally abused. Doug went on to verbally abuse Ruth throughout their marriage, though. He called her derogatory names, threatened her, embarrassed and shamed her in front of others. They have now been married for 10 years and have 3 children. And Ruth now knows she's being abused but feels stuck. A lot of women and even men are in the same situation as Ruth. But why don't they just leave their marriage? There are many reasons, but it comes down to the fact that people aren't educated on emotional abuse and how serious it is. Emotional verbal abuse doesn't leave any visible injuries like physical abuse does, but it does leave other injuries to the victim. Natasha Tracy mentions a few, such as depression, low self-esteem, and feeling trapped. It also affects a person's mood, sex drive, work, and school. Emotional abuse in marriage also affects the children. According to Anderson and Kramer Benjamin, usually when a spouse is abusive, they're going to be abusive to their child. The children will also witness the abuse, which will cause them to have fear and anxiety. Some children may even feel responsible for the way their parents are acting. Emotional spouse abuse is something that people aren't educated on, and because of that, there are a lot of Ruths in the world. In 1994, the Violence Against Women Act was created to help women who are being abused. This act then authorized the creation of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. This hotline is for women, men, children, and families who are affected by domestic violence, which is intimate, partner violence, or relationship abuse. They can call or chat to receive crisis intervention and sources for immediate safety. They focus on the needs of the family members and how to help stop the abuse that is happening. The hotline is a place that even concerned friends, family, coworkers can go to seek guidance to help someone, which is a great strength to families. They try and educate communities all over about the effects of domestic violence and what people can do to get out of those situations. The government made this program possible. They have also created a federal law to help stop domestic violence. All of these things are wonderful, but that isn't going to stop it. The people of the United States need to be educated on what emotional verbal abuse is, the negative effects that come with it, and how to get out of an emotionally abusive relationship. This can happen with more family advocates in each state educating the people. If more people were educated on emotional abuse, they would be able to leave a relationship before it even started. If more people were educated, there would be less abusers because they would realize what they're doing is wrong. If more people were educated, they would know how to get out of an awful situation. Do you think if Ruth was educated on verbal emotional abuse, she would be in the situation she is in now? Thank you. I feel like I was talking so fast. Did I even make 2 minutes?
No, you did 4 minutes. You're good.
Oh, good.
Good job.
Very good. Very good.
All right.
Okay. Questions.
So do you think you mentioned like there's federal laws to help stop this? Do you feel like if the laws were more enforced or the punishment was greater, that it would deter people, or do you just feel that the law is not the answer? Like there just needs to be more programs that educate.
No, I think that if more people enforce the law, so when I was reading about it, it said that like they could call the police officer or 911 and they could come to the house, and if the police officer thinks that there's abuse going on, he can arrest them. But if it's emotional abuse, it's hard to know unless he was there, like if he heard name calling or whatever. So I think that's what's tricky. And so, I mean, I couldn't find exactly how many people get arrested for domestic violence, but yeah, I think if there was a way to enforce it more, I don't know if they could like still arrest them and like question them. I don't know, but yeah, I definitely think if there's more of a stronger punishment, because it just is up to how bad the case was or how bad the abuse was. So yeah, that's what I think. I don't know if I answered your question.
That's good.
I have a question. Still trying to figure out how to word it, but so every case is going to be different with verbal abuse because, like you mentioned, sometimes people don't know they're doing it. It comes out in different forms. So you mentioned the hotline, but are there other resources that can help a person approach their spouse if it's not too intense, where they can be like, "Hey, this is something we need to work on"?
Right. It was so hard to find any programs that are there. So I don't know. The hotline, they did mention that they could help. So that when I went on it, there's actually an emergency leave button on the site. So you can click on it and what's the word? It hurries and exits out, whatever. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I was like, oh, it's probably because if someone that's abusing them hurries and comes and it lives in their house or whatever, they can exit out so they don't know. So I think that was good. And they did mention that like they mentioned how you can get out of an abusive relationship in that. So I don't know if they could just chat with them and then if their spouse comes. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of programs, and that was one thing I was surprised about. Even with like physical abuse, there wasn't a ton. I don't know why.
Thank you.
I have a question. So, is there any ways that you can, the abuse partner can prevent like bad consequences, with the law? Like, for example, if she just wants to like escape with her kids, like, and then the she doesn't really record any like abuse cases to the police, so she doesn't have any like, how you said,
Like evidence to get out.
So now that he can, like he can like say that she's taking the kids, or like sue her or press charges for taking the kids.
Right.
So how can like a person like prevent that or help in that situation?
So like how can the mom get out of that situation without, like, if there's no evidence? Yeah, see, that's the tricky part with emotional abuse, is they kept talking about how it's one of the most common forms of abuse, but you can't detect it. And so in that case, what do you do? Like with Ruth, how does she leave that situation because her husband's just going to get mad? I honestly do not know. And I was trying to find so much on that because I bet that happens a lot, is they want to get out, but they want to have their kids, but they don't know how. So I don't know, like I said, maybe if more people were educated about abuse, and I don't know, that's a tough one because emotional abuse is so hard to detect. And I wish I could have figured out how many cases are like that in the US where there is people that are stuck in a relationship with kids and they can't get out because they don't have like any proof. I guess if I was them, I would maybe set up like cameras or recorders or something in the house to get proof, because that seems like that's the only way situation without, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, thank you for the answer.
So I guess, how do I put this? So my question is, okay, so sometimes I see my sister being really mean to her husband, and I'm like, why are you saying those things to him at all, especially in front of people? That is so rude. I don't speak that way to my husband, and he doesn't speak that way to me ever, let alone in front of people. But at the same time, like, it's not every day, all the time. It's not so constant that, so like I look at their family and I think her husband's really patient to put up with it. But at the same time, if they were to get divorced, I think it would be more harmful for the children than staying at least at that level of what I see. I don't know. So where's the balance there between, okay, the emotional abuse is harmful, but having a divorce is harmful too? Like, how do you know where that balance is?
Right. I think that's a tough one too, because it really does depend on the situation. If they're yelling, what's the word? Because like I talked about how kids get affected by seeing it, and like oftentimes they feel like they're the cause of it. So I think if it's happening a lot in front of the kids, that's a situation where, okay, maybe a divorce is good so the kids aren't around it. But if it's something, but then sometimes the kids might think it's just normal in marriage and they might not realize it, and then they're going to end up being that way in their marriage. So really, I think, I don't know if I'd say like swearing and like being really derogatory towards each other. I would say get out, like the kids do not need to see that. But then there's other instances. I'm not saying it's okay to abuse your child verbally, but I just think, yeah, that's hard. Like if they're around it often and they do it in front of their kids often and it's like 24/7, I definitely think that they should leave, because that's not good for the kids. And it was hard to find a lot of evidence, and I guess I wasn't really looking up children, but it would be interesting to research more how it affects the children, even with physical abuse as well, because I bet it has a lot of bad effects on the kids. So that's a good question.
Thank you, Shay. You did a good job. All right, I think Sydney, you are up.
Yep. Just 1 second, I'll pull it up. Nope, wrong one. Alright, I am Sydney Gallagher, and the issue that I think poses a great threat to the family is divorce. The current divorce rate is 40 to 50% and is even higher for those who divorce and then remarry. Research has shown that divorce affects the split couple the most financially and when it comes to their relationships with others, but it affects the children even more. In a research study done by Patrick Fagan, it was found that children of divorce were affected in every category of development. These children were more likely to be neglected and as a result, exhibited more health problems as well as behavioral and emotional problems, and are involved more frequently in crime and drug abuse and have higher rates of suicide. These children on average have higher rates of teenage pregnancy and have lower academic performance than their peers raised in a two-parent home. They have strained relationships with family and struggle with religious beliefs and socializing with their peers. I myself am a child of divorce and can confirm that these changes occurred with me and my siblings. I was 20 years old when my parents were divorced, and it still affected me. Because my father cheated on my mother, I had trust issues in relationships and a lot of anger to deal with. It was even harder for my 4 younger siblings, and in the past 5 years, I have seen them deal and work through many of the negative effects previously mentioned. When my parents got a divorce, a part of me wasn't surprised because I knew they'd been struggling for a long time. But another part of me wasn't surprised because I thought to myself how almost every one of my friends had divorced parents, so it was only a matter of time before mine were as well. That mindset in society shows how common divorce is and how society's views have changed on the subject. In the article Changes in Family Structure, Family Values and Politics, the author shares this quote: "Family structure and family values have undergone tremendous changes over the last generation. The basic structure of the family has been reshaped, and family values and related attitudes have also undergone shifts. Families are smaller and less stable, marriage is less central and cohabitation more common, and the value of children and the values for children have altered, and within marriages, gender roles have become less traditional and more egalitarian in both word and practice." That was written almost 10 years ago, and views on marriage and family have continued to follow a less traditional path. Recent changes with the laws concerning marriage have affected society's perception of the more traditional nuclear family and has made divorce more acceptable. But I believe the law that contributes to divorce the most is the establishment of the no-fault divorce. Now, of course, there are legitimate reasons for obtaining a divorce, like adultery or physical and emotional abuse. That is not usually the case with the no-fault divorce. A no-fault divorce refers to a type of divorce in which the spouse that is filing does not have to prove any fault on the part of the other spouse. All a spouse has to do is give any reason to the state for the divorce, and the most commonly given reason is irreconcilable differences or an irreparable breakdown of the marriage. These are just fancy ways of saying that the couple does not get along and that the marital relationship cannot be repaired. This type of divorce is regulated by state law, and there are currently 16 states that allow this law, with several states trying to get this law passed. It does nothing to educate families on how to work through their problems and their hard times, and offers no solutions to the high divorce rate. Instead of addressing the problem, this policy is doing the complete opposite by making a divorce even simpler to obtain. In all honesty, there are not many policies in place to help combat this issue. There are changes that can be made to prevent the divorce rate from advancing any further. There should be more steps required to attain a divorce that show every last route has been taken, and it should require longer than 90 days. A couple contemplating divorce should be informed of all resources available to them to work on their marriage, like counseling and family workshops. Each state can modify these regulations in a way that best suits the people who live there. They can also provide resources before marriage to help couples from the best foundation they can. Perhaps on a government level, more tax breaks for married couples could be presented as an incentive for working on their marriage. Some couples do not marry because they receive more government benefits and financial aid as single adults. The laws could change to accommodate the same needs for these adults as a married couple. Change needs to take place in the defense of marriage, but it is our responsibility to bring this issue to light in our spheres of influence. The end.
Good job.
Good job.
4 minutes, 20 seconds. Perfect. Good job.
Okay, I have a question. You mentioned the establishment of no-fault divorce law. Okay, I was just wondering, do you know if that's in Idaho, like they enforce it in Idaho?
I believe not.
Okay.
And I don't know where Idaho is on appealing for it, but in some of the research I saw, it said that states in the South have higher divorce rates than the North, and so there's a good chunk of states in the South who do it, and kind of the Midwest, but no, not Idaho.
Okay. Oh, I don't know why. That was just interesting to me. I'd have never even heard of that. Like, that is crazy. No wonder there's more divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question. So according to your topic, like, what do you find out? Like, what is your position? Is it better for a marriage to stay married, just to give a good example to their kids, even though they're not happy anymore, but like just to try, just to make it, like to be together just for the kids?
Yeah, and so every marriage is going to be different, and every situation is going to be different. I'm kind of pro counseling, and so with a marriage, I think people need to be more willing to try before giving up completely. So when it comes to having a family, I think they need to try to work through their issues, and then if they really can't, and there's some serious problems there, then divorce is probably healthier. Even when people get divorced, I think parents need to have a healthy relationship with each other for the family. And I know it can be hard to do, but I see a lot of people who don't try and then are just done because it's so simple to be done. So I think more effort needs to be in place before saying they're done. So I think they should try, but if they really can't, then yes, divorce is an option.
Thank you.
Did you find anything about premarital counseling, like helping couples to see the value of staying married and why to stay married and before they get married, or are there any states that require anything like that before they get their marriage license?
There aren't states that require it. It's mostly a religious thing. And I was trying not to drift into that. So, but there are some religions that require like a marriage course before they'll marry you. But marriage is kind of tricky because it involves church and state a little bit. But no, none of the states require it. And I think that there should be more programs available. Like family life education programs should be more available in general. And I think that some couples would fight less if they knew where they each stood on certain things before getting married. So I think it'd be a good idea to start implementing those.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready for Julia?
I'm not bad. I'll go.
You'll be great.
Okay, so I choose the topic of fatherlessness in our society and how it has become a threat to children and families. According to the U.S. Census Bureau in 2012, among children who were part of the post-war generation, 87.7 grew up with two biological parents who were married to each other. Today, only 61% will spend their entire childhood in an intact family. The statistics show that 20 million children in the USA are living in a fatherless home. Most alarming are the negative consequences for children and families that live in a fatherless home. In a study titled The Relative Impact of Education Attainment and Fatherlessness in Criminality, done in 1996 and published in the Journal of Correctional Education, it was reported that there is a correlation between children raised by family-headed households and the probability to be involved in criminal activity. Another research published by Wiley on behalf of the Society for Research in Child Development examined the question, does father absence place daughters at special risk for early sexual activity and teenager pregnancy? And it concludes the following. Father absence was an overriding risk factor for early sexual activity and adolescent pregnancy. Conversely, father presence was a major protective factor against early sexual outcomes, even if other risk factors were present. These findings may support social policies that encourage fathers to form and remain in families with their children, unless the marriage is highly conflictual or violent. Also, the National Center for Fathering provided statistics and studies done that show other effects caused by fatherlessness, such as poverty, greater risk of substance abuse, negative impact to their physical and emotional health, and significant decline in their academic performance. I spent most of my childhood and adolescence in a father-absent home. My father immigrated from Mexico to the United States to work in order to provide for our family needs. He used to visit us once a year for only a week, since I was born to when I was 18 years old when I moved here with my whole family. And this situation made it hard for me to develop a father-child relationship, which caused me to have or to suffer from depression most of my teenager years. And until today, even though I do love him, we don't really have a relationship that I can go to him and talk about any, life decisions or important decisions. So I have experienced that, or how that can affect a family. And that's one of the reasons why I choose this topic for my speech. And I would like to provide information that could help those children and families affected by this threat find ways to improve their circumstances. The National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse is an office of family assistance, funded national resources for fathers, practitioners, programs, and federal grantees, states, and the public at large who are serving or interested in supporting strong families. So this program provides resources that can help not only fathers, but also families that are fatherless to have those resources to become better parents. And we as a community can go to that program and learn more, so we can also learn how to advocate and support those laws that are in place, or how we can also create laws to help improve fatherhood and help families and children. That's it.
Good job.
Good job.
Can you give me
so
the
there
name
was-
of that program? I want to write it down so I can put it in the review.
Yes. Yeah, it's called the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse. And the link is easier, it's just fatherhood.gov. And I was mentioning it, but I saw that I was running out of time, so I just cut it short. But yeah, it's just, you go to the a link, fatherhood.gov. The name of the organization is really long, but the website is short, just fatherhood.gov.
It's great that they have these resources. How do we raise awareness to help people know that these resources are available?
And that's thing. I think that we can, as family, that we're having these classes, we can start by that. We have been encouraged to post things that we learn in our class. So I think that can start something, like by posting it in Facebook, to talking to our families and friends about this kind of resources that they are there, because I don't really see, people talking about the importance of fatherhood, or the negative impact of fatherlessness in our society. So it's just us as members of our society to start talking about these programs.
I have a question. Do you think that it's possible to prevent fatherlessness from happening? Like, like there's going to be situations where there isn't going to be a father, or like, do you know how to explain this? Like, how can we make it so there's less fatherless families? Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's a hard thing to do because of just certain situations, but I guess you kind of mentioned that already in the last answer, but
No, I think it's important, like that. I feel that it needs to be more education in school about the importance of the role of fatherhood. I don't think there is much, or either motherhood. There is no like a lot of education, and I think it has to come, of course, in the house, but also a school can help by providing, like education about the roles of father and mother, not just the sexual education. I think they focus more on that, or they have more information about sexual education, that the role as father and mother. So I think that can help if we can, as as citizens, we can support or advocate to have more education on parenting in the schools, that can help to prevent or reduce the fatherlessness in our society.
yeah, that's a great idea.
I have a question. So you mentioned that in general the rates for fatherlessness have gone up, I guess. But But do you think there's any kind of cultural influence to it? Do you think that maybe certain parts of the country or the world tend to have that problem more than others?
Yes, it seems to have like in countries like ours that it is more I was gonna say like there's more freedom per se about our beliefs. You know, we have the rights to support our beliefs, what we want to believe, or I think that we have taken it the wrong way, and now we have become like a selfish society, like in a majority, and just think about our own good, and we don't think more as a society. And countries that are more conservative, they place more importance on the roles of on fatherhood or motherhood, um, and the conservative countries seems to have less fatherlessness uh, problems than like countries like us, or you know, England, or you know, those countries that seems more liberals.
Okay, thank you.
And my question is, do you feel like there is anyone that can ever come in and take the place of the father, like a grandfather or an uncle? Like, can that mediate some of the problems of fatherlessness, or does that not help?
Yes, it does. It does. And this website that I provide, it has resources and programs for those people that wants to step up and provide a father figure. And it does help. It does. It does help. It shows, you know, there are studies and researchers that it can be, you know, like not replaced, but it can. Other people can provide a father figure, and it can make a difference in a child's life, in a family life too. Like you said, I mentioned the grandparents and other family members, and even step parents, stepfathers, if they learn their role and take the role as it should be, they can make a big impact, a positive impact on those children.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, Melissa, I have a question for you real quick. No, I just was, when I was listening to your speech, did you have a law, policy, or program? I totally missed that, or an alternative?
No.
Or
I don't
okay, that's okay. I heard you talking about like mentioning it in the question and answers, not like your policy, but ways the government can help. So I wasn't sure if I missed it in your speech.
No, it was more in the question and answer.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we're done.
Yeah, we did it.
Yay. Good job, girls.
Yeah.
They're also nice.
Awesome.
Okay, I guess we just can even watch it again to fill out our feedback and
Right.
send
Yeah.
it to everybody of you. So I'll post the link right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
Awesome.
thanks, ladies.